Hey you guys, don't know if you saw my recent video on killing giants, how to fight giants and increase your rating. Well, if you want more encouragement on that, then I've got, one game really to share with you. I've just played 2 games, okay? And this is my first one. I'm playing somebody rated 1280, so quite a bit, over 100 points lower than me. And I was just over 1400 at the time when we started this game. And I'll just show you the end of the game, right? It's a really, really kind of messy game. Both kings were forced to move. There was no castling. We got very involved in tactical, sharp stuff in the middle of the board. My opponent here captures a pawn with his knight, and I recapture, and then king comes to here. So I'm actually up a full minor piece at this point. Okay, this is the end of the game. It's actually a 60-minute game. He's used 7 minutes, less than 7 minutes of his time. I've used 12, and now I play here. And there's actually, then I realized that there's a checkmate here. My king actually can't go there, or in fact, my king can't move, right? Because of white's pieces around, and because my king is so far forward. Knight to here is mate, and also I think rook d5 would also be mate. So knight played there, checkmate, and I lose, I don't know, 12 points or something. I lost 11 points from that game, playing somebody 110 points lower rated, okay? So here's my next game. I then went on to pick another open challenge, another rated open challenge with somebody rated about 1570. So let me take you through this fairly quickly. There's some good points to this. So we play the Dutch. My opponent starts with d4, and I play f5, the Dutch defense, and I'm trying to learn the Leningrad Dutch at the moment, which is typified by g5, and then the bishop on here and there. So, you've got this advanced pawn, and really you're looking to, the e file is normally the big kind of area of contention. So we have c4, this is very natural. He wants to put his knight behind the pawn there. I bring my knight out to f6. We have e3. Now I play b6 to prepare to fianchetto my light squared bishop. Very often in the Dutch defense, white actually tries to fianchetto his light squared bishop first. And the one who can get it in first is quite often quite happy to do that. So we have knight f3, bishop to f7, bishop comes out now, and white castles. I play my bishop here, and I'm getting ready to castle also. Knight c3, black castles. Okay, so as can happen very often in the Dutch, you can end up with quite a thick, gloopy, gridlock kind of position in the game, and that's exactly what we get. So we have b3, d6. Now I'm preparing to I want to develop my other knight, and I want to bring it to here because this e5 break is going to be the key break. So if you think about the phases of the game, your default in the opening should be to develop your pieces, control the board, get your king safe. Once you've completed development, you are in the middle game. And in the middle game, you want to be improving your pieces, give them more scope, build up to an attack against your opponent, and you want to be considering pawn breaks. So pawn breaks are where you rattle up, you shake up the playing field, you shake up the terrain, and very often things will unravel and fall apart. So then you get into the end game, which is like the denouement. It's the unraveling of the chess game. And I think a big difference between, or the key difference between beginners or intermediate players and then advanced and master players is that more of the move selection in the middle game and even in the opening for more advanced players is done with a mind to setting yourself up for a positive advantage in the denouement of the game. So we have bishop to b2, so lining up his bishop against mine, rook e8, helping to support this push. So now I've got, if my pawn goes here, I've got 1, 2 defenders against there, but white has 1, 2 attackers as well. So I move my knight up here. That actually releases my bishop here, and that's quite a nice square for my knight to be on. So now I have 1, 2, 3 supporters there. And if my knight comes to d7, I'll have 4. We have rook d1, knight to d7. Now the bishop drops back, and you have to ask yourself, why did my opponent make that move? And the hypothesis that I've come up with, which a bad hypothesis for why your opponent made that move is better than no idea at all, is that he probably wants to clear out this knight, advance his pawn, and checkmate me on g7. Okay, why wouldn't he want to do that? So now I can throw in e5. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 defenders against only 2 attacking pieces. So white now, instead of going in for the exchange, where there's no gain in the exchange, then he advances d5. Now what this does is it makes this bishop look really stupid, because now white's got this lovely light squared pawn chain, and if my bishop's going to find any joy in this game, it's going to have to come round the pawn chain somehow, unless I start throwing my own pawns in and try and break through as well, which is also an idea. So now I play knight to c5, because my knight is no longer needed supporting this. It's still supported 3 times. So we are thinking about improving our pieces. And if white wants to capture this knight, I've now got another knight to replace it, like for like. We have pawn push. Now I grab white's knight, recaptures with the bishop, and now I supplant knight number 2 for knight number 1. Bishop drops back again to b2, and I now play c5. So now we are starting to look kind of gummed up on the queen side, okay? And this is a feature of the game, so keep an eye on this. We have a3, I lift my rook, thinking maybe doubling rooks at some point, and now b5. Okay, now we have 3 locked off files. B, C, and D are now log jammed. So I play a6 with the idea that if white takes, I can capture with my bishop, and then my bishop's got some pressure on this pawn here. That bishop will have to stay defending it. And we have a4. Now I drop my bishop back, thinking about, I don't know, maybe push the pawn, bring my bishop into the game that way. The light square bishop can quite often be a bit of a handicap in the Dutch. And now we have rook to a1, and now I decide, actually, I'm going to gum up the entire queen side of the board. So I just push a5, and now we are completely gridlocked there. Now what this does is, when you've got this kind of barricade like this, bishops cannot get through that. My bishops can't get through it, white's bishops can't get through it. They're either going to run into one of their own pawns or one of their opponents, which is probably defended, and no go. Okay, so we have to play on this king side. So the action area moves. So bishop to d3 attacks the knight. I retreat the knight. Okay, because obviously I don't want to have to recapture and double my pawns here and maybe open up this rook a bit. So I retreat the knight. This also creates the opportunity of a pawn push to e4, attacking both knight and bishop. So white retreats. And now I get in e4. And this is quite key. This knight is a central defending knight for white, and I've just taken away his favourite square. Okay, he can't move here, which is also his favourite square, even better square probably. So the knight comes here, I kick it again, h6. Now the knight comes here, and this is music to my ears, because I've got this bishop's rubbish. Okay, this bishop has been trying to sniff around, trying to find a way into the battle for a few moves, and it's found nothing. So takes, and I win a pawn. Okay, so that whole flurry there, and I feel like I've just started to get a toehold into this game, and with these pawns coming forwards, I'm now feeling a little bit more confident. All right, what happens next is I throw it all back away, right? So we have f3, another pawn break, attacking this, and I line up my queen behind my rook. We have f takes e4. Now, I have 2 options here. I've got knight takes, which is not bad, you know, putting my knight on a very good square there, or I've got rook takes, and I figure that having my rook on here, my queen I'm very likely to win this pawn as well. However, can you see the immediate tactical disadvantage of playing that move? Okay, it is obviously bishop to f3, hitting both rooks. Okay, so although I've just won a pawn, I'm now going to lose the exchange. So the best option here, I think, is rook to e1, backing up my queen. Obviously, I can't allow the bishop to capture on a8 because that's undefended there. So I play that. Bishop takes, and now knight takes. That's probably the move I should have played in the first place. Bishop takes, which is kind of what I was also preventing by not moving the knight, and king to g7, queen b2 check, and king comes here. The queen can't come to there because of the rook, can't come to there or there because of the king, can't come to there. Okay, so fairly comfortable. Although I've just thrown away my advantage because I'd won a pawn and now thrown away the exchange. So what do we do when we are down in material? Well, we say to ourselves that material is one of the factors in a game. It's one imbalance. If material is unequal, yeah, it's an imbalance. So right now, in terms of raw potential, my opponent has a slight advantage because he's got two rooks to my rook and a knight. Okay, in my favour, I have an extra pawn here. So, but what you then have to do, and to improve in chess, you have to find out ways to adapt your play in each game to maximise the benefit of imbalances that are in your favour and minimise the benefit of any imbalances that are in the favour of your opponent. Okay, now, what do rooks like? Rooks like straight lines, they like open files, okay? And one good thing here in black's favour, I've still got 7 pawns on the board, right? White still has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns on the board. Okay, so there's actually a lot of pawns around. And that means, if you look at it, the H file is not open, nor is the G file. Okay, we've got a semi-open file on F, it's got only a black pawn. We've got a semi-open file on E, it's only got a white pawn. We've got a semi-open file on D, and as already described, all of this is completely logjammed. Okay, so these are the key files really, because this one has a white pawn on it, and these rooks cannot get through a white pawn. They can't ever take their own piece. They could maybe gang up, double up, and come after one of these 2 pawns. So this is where the hot spot is now in the game. Now, my knight on this nice outpost here on e4 is defending this pawn. That's okay. And these pawns are kind of okay, considering that the main threat right now is major piece attacks, because my opponent has only got queen and 2 rooks. So, rook comes across to e1 for some reason, looking at the back of its own pawn. I advance my queen to e6, looking at this undefended pawn here, and we have another pawn break. Okay, we have a big shakedown. g4 is now attacking this. Now, critical point in the game. Clearly this pawn is in some trouble. I could, no, I can't take. I could say captures again, but that then creates a completely open file, and I want to keep the files as closed as possible, as long as possible, because open files will favour white more than me. If the game remains closed, my knight may have more opportunities and may actually be better than a rook. Okay, so I grab the pawn on c4. White grabs the pawn on f5. Now, critical move, what do you do? It's very tempting, and I think a lot of beginners would just snap recapture. But what's going to happen then? Look, rook captures with check, with the other rook about to come behind it, the queen about to dive down. It could all be over super quickly. You absolutely must not retake in that kind of situation. g5, I think, is much better move, okay? Because it means this file is still closed. This file is semi-open, but the pawn's protected. This file is closed to white, and we want to keep the files closed to white. That's our objective. That's what I've got to do. If I'm going to have a chance in this game, I've got to keep the files closed to my opponent. Now we have Queen E2, and now the queens are facing off. And this is, again, a very, very critical point in the game, where you have to say, okay, how good is my knight? Is my knight almost as good as a rook? And I actually decide, yes, it is. Because my knight is guarding some very important squares. My knight also, you have to notice, is in the center. This is the center. So my knight has great control over the board. So I accept the proposed exchange of queens. And now I advance my rook to e5. Okay? I just want to stop ideas. I want to stop these rooks from getting through my lines and tearing me to bits. Because a rook that gets back here, that 6th rank is looking very vulnerable, right? So we have rook to c2 for some reason. I advance my king to f6. And I have the option of grabbing a free pawn. Okay? And now notice that this rook that's on the 7th rank or 2nd rank can't come here because of my knight or here because of my knight. So my knight is actually guarding the two most critical files, which is this one. Okay? It's also defending that pawn. This knight is a hero right now. Okay, so we have rook forward to f3, and I decide to go for the pawn trade. It's arguable that this was not the most sensible idea, because after takes, we now have the first open file on the board in the game on move 39. So, however, the knight is still guarding these two key squares, so this rook cannot get to them. I am now 2 pawns up. Okay, I've got maybe a 1 pawn majority here and 1 pawn majority here. So what I have to do is somehow, if this, and this is when you get into the end game, we're now in the ending. When you're in the ending, you have to say to yourself, pragmatically, if I am going to win this game, what has to happen? Now, I've only got a king and a knight. And you cannot win, you cannot checkmate your opponent with a king and a knight. I have to promote a pawn. It's the only way I can possibly win this chess game, right? My opponent could technically win if all the pawns and everything else is removed. You can win by force with a rook and a king against the king. So, I have to get a pawn up the board. White plays king g2, I play h5. It's generally a good idea when you've got a king in front of pawns to line up those pawns side by side, shoulder to shoulder, because pawns shoulder to shoulder block out all the squares in front of them. Now, if your pawns are staggered, then a king can, in theory, get through and get behind your lines. You don't want that. So now we have h3. Now, again, it'd be very tempting to play h4. But the king can go here. And now my pawns are staggered. Maybe the king can go here. Right, if my king moves. So it means my king would be tied to the defense of this square. Should I play that? So I mustn't play that move. So I move my king across now to e5. We have king to f3. And I simply push a pawn up. This is a spare move. I know I've got it. I can also play c4 at any point. I know I've got that in my pocket as well. We have rook g2. Excuse me. Now the rook's attacking that pawn. It is defended currently by the knight. And the knight is on an outpost. It can't be harassed by pawns. So now I push c4. I've got to keep the pressure up. I've got to keep pushing pawns up the board. King comes back. And now I realise I have a fork with the knight on c3. I move my rook across to defend this pawn. Sorry, my king across to defend this pawn so that my knight is free to fork. King moves to d1, which is also in the scope of this fork. So I play knight c3 with a fork. King comes here. I grab the pawn. I've got to grab the pawn. Rook across, check. King to e5. Now the rook makes use of the open file and gets behind my lines, and now time becomes critical. So I push up my king, attacking the pawn on e3. Rook comes to g8, attacking my pawn. King captures, right? This was a key pawn here. I want to move these guys up. I have to win with these pawns. This guy's going to be slow right now. These two pawns are my best bet, and I've got to do it before Rook can take these two, get out of the way. Right, that is actually 8 moves. White can promote in 8 moves. I cannot allow that, right? Rook captures, d4. Rook captures, d3, check. King retreats to c1. My opponent is down to 32 minutes from a 60-minute game. I'm on 40 minutes. And now, critically, d2. Okay? And we have check, and now my pawn is only 1 jump away from promotion. This is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves away from promotion. Thank you very much. Now king to here, and then the final move of the game, knight to b2. Knight to b2 check, and it's really all over now. The pawn is covering these 2 squares, right? So the king can't go there, can't go there. Okay? The king is in check and only has 1 legal move, at which point we're going to have pawn to d1 equals queen, check. King has to take the knight, queen will then capture the rook, and it's all over. So, what have we learned from that? I just played 2 games. I lost 11 points on the first game. I won 12 points on game number 2. Right? And losing 12 points against a lower rated player hurts worse than losing 2 games against somebody of your own kind of rating, right? But winning 12 points against somebody 150 points higher, 170 points higher, is a really, really good feeling. So, if I'd only played the game against the stronger opponent, I'd have been ahead in material. Ahead in points right now, right? What's not to like, you know? And it's satisfying, and it's rewarding, and it's enjoyable, and it was a damn good game. I had to dig deep, and I dug deep. So there you go. So keep going, guys. Get out there, pick a fight with a giant, slay those giants. It can be done, and I do believe that the more that we pick fights against stronger opponents, the better we will get, and the quicker your rating will climb. Alright, thank you for watching. Please do subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed. And I'll see you soon.